Hello guys, my name is SVB and I'm back for another video, and today we're going to be looking at some diamond level Lucio play from one of my patrons, Rax, who's popping out the frogman on Lijiang Tower in control point. So with Lucio, one of the most important things is how you control and maneuver your team around. So in this video I'm mostly going to talk about speed boost usage, Rax's ability usage, particularly his Amp It Up, and his general engagement and controlling of fights. So let's get to it, guys. So before I get to breaking down all the things that Rax is doing wrong, I just want to start by mentioning what he does well. Firstly, I think his understanding of the game is quite sound. He was always aware as to regrouping, there's a fair amount of calling out, and he also made sure to taxi teammates of his who had died, which is always helpful as a Lucio. And on top of that, you're going to see some huge environmental kills come in from Rax, particularly on Garden, where his team has very good control of the point and he's able to boop quite a few people off. But there's still some things I want to point out, so let's get into breaking down what he could have done better. So right from the spawn doors, we're actually going to notice that Rax opts not to use his E to speed his team through. Now, this is an interesting tactic on certain points, and I just want to talk through why you do or don't speed boost through the door. Now, on certain map types, such as Assault, speed boosting through the door doesn't always make sense, because the first few steps you make out of the doors don't really matter. So to give an example, if we look at Hanamura Point A and assume that you are the attackers, speed boosting out the door doesn't really make sense, because what's going to happen is you're going to end up at those big wooden gates anyways, and then you're going to stall out because you're not fast enough to get through. So in that scenario, it makes a lot of sense for Lucios to hold their speed boost till their team gets through the choke, and then you press E to give them that burst of speed to rush through and take the defenders by surprise. However, on control point, that doesn't apply because both teams have the exact same path to take, which means that if you speed boost out the door on control point, you're guaranteed to get to the middle at least as fast as the opponents, and if not faster if they don't have a Lucio. So therefore there's no danger of being caught in an awkward choke that you need to speed boost through. It's pretty much always advisable to speed boost from the go on control point. Now Rax opts not to use it, and you're going to see in a second that he actually uses it a second later to try and help his Reaper. But it's of no avail, his Reaper dies. And now the speed boost has gone largely to waste, or rather the Amp It Up has gone largely to waste. And we've got a 12-second cooldown now, whereas had we used it out the door we would have had the advantage of the speed boost and now had Amp It Up to go again. Anyways, that's a minor mistake. We'll let the fight play out. You'll see here the Rax's team have got a dive comp, so they go in quite nice and aggressive. Rax, I think, tries to follow his tanks here, which is good. You want to follow the target call if there's some sort of coordinated dive attempt. And then we're going to see here that Rax gets a nice environmental kill on the Zarya. Very nice start. Now this is where the first mistake comes in. So Rax sees this Doomfist, and you just heard in the comms he calls Doomfist. And Rax's Diva actually chases this Doomfist. Now Rax goes very deep to try and confirm this kill. In the end, all he gets is one hit, and that's enough to finish the Doomfist. So the reason I point this out is basically to say that the Doomfist is probably going to die regardless of Rax's intervention. But now, as a consequence, Rax is deeply out of position, and bang, he gets 3-tapped by the McCree, who's got a Pocket Mercy. So that's a decision that Rax makes, that on the face of it gets him a kill, but actually costs him his life. And had he stayed back on point where we see his Ana is now, he could have not only helped secure the point and top up all the players that were injured from the previous fight, but he would have also ensured that neither him nor his support partner end up dying. So that might seem like quite a harsh criticism to make, but once we get to the diamond and above elos, you really have to start looking at every single mistake you make and look at the idea of cause and correlation. So that death was completely unnecessary and caused only by Rax getting a bit too greedy. Now fast forward a little bit, not much happens for a good 10-15% of the point, but this next fight is going to break out, and again it's not going to be too significant a fight. We're going to see Rax make a mistake that he gets away with, and it's a warning sign for what might come next, but Rax continues to make this mistake, so let's just see it play out for the first time. So the enemy team are coming over the bridge. Rax goes quite deep to try and get an environmental kill. He gets flashbang, but thankfully the enemy Lucio boops him away and no harm is done. The fight continues. Rax again goes quite deep, but he's pushed back. Now for the rest of this fight, if I take it back a second, after Rax goes for this initial environmental kill, I'm not sure that he actually knows who he's targeting. So we'll see his camera pan one way, then to another way to the Doomfist, but he's not actually watching the Doomfist. Now he's watching the McCree, and the McCree pops high noon, so he hides. So for this entire fight, I'm not sure that Rax actually knows who he's targeting. So this is probably a case of decisiveness. Now Rax does make a few calls throughout this game, and does call out some targets, but as Lucio, it really is helpful to both you and your team if you're really in there with the comms, really calling targets, really trying to organize your team, because ultimately that's what Lucio's best at, more so than even any hero. because his main ability is to be able to control the physical tempo of his team. So if you're in calm, telling them which way to go and then you speed boost them, you make it that much easier for your team to walk around and go from one target to the next. In this case, Rax is quite passive in this fight. He's just sort of following the action as it happens, and he doesn't actually make any decision at any point. Probably because he was so focused on getting the environmental kill that once that failed, he was a bit rattled, he was a bit unsure where his place was in the fight. So again, just be a bit more decisive and recognize which targets are important to kill and which targets are not. In this case, he could have probably prioritized the Doomfist and stuck with killing him because he was the one diving his fellow support. And as I said before, like the other roles, supports come in pairs, so make sure that if you're a support, you're keeping your other support alive. Now that fight still ends up well for Rax's team. We're going to see in a second as I fast forward that the almost same thing ends up happening again. So we'll just see he goes to help his D.Va kill his Widowmaker, but he goes a bit out of position for that cause. Now he ends up in a little bit of a duel with his Doomfist. Thankfully the Doomfist misses his punch. Now the enemy team, as you can see with the Zarya beam poking out here, are going to come over the bridge, and Rax is going to try again for the environmental kills. Now it's not bad to try the environmental kills. What happens here is that Rax goes too deep. His tanks aren't actually positioned at the bridge to give him cover to allow him to make this boop. So he extends himself quite deep, and now Hammond slams down and takes him out because Rax exposed his position. So if I go back a couple seconds again, we can see that Rax's Winston is backing out of this area. He doesn't actually want to hold this narrow choke, which is partly his mistake. Rax's D.Va is far back here, so he's got no support here when he goes in to get this environmental kill. That allows Hammond to exploit him. Now at this point, I would actually be okay if Rax pops sound barriers to save himself. And the reasoning is, things like that are obviously completely contextual, and in Overwatch you're forced to make split-second decisions all the time. In this case, Rax's team are at 75%, meaning that they probably only have to hold out for one proper fight and maybe one staggered fight as the enemy rush to touch point. If we take it back to the scenario that he had when the fight began, we can actually see that the enemy Lucio ends up falling off, probably trying to do some wall riding business. So that means the Rax's team is off to a great start. Now if he dies, however, both teams are going to be without their Lucio, and Rax is going to end up holding on to the sound barrier, and that makes it a lot harder for his team. If Rax pops the sound barrier now, he does save himself, keeping him in the fight, and we know that the enemy team have just come over the bridge and they're about to start the fight. Even though it's not a controlled use of the sound barrier, i.e. Rax is not the one dictating the play, he's having to respond and use the sound barrier, it would still be a much better use than what ends up happening, which is that he dies, and then his team quickly follows suit because they don't have that extra healing, they don't have any sound barrier to top them up either. And Rax's team actually ends up losing this fight quite convincingly. And obviously the enemy Lucio comes back faster than Rax. So all round, that one positioning mistake, that one desire to go and get that environmental kill and maybe be a huge playmaker, ends up costing Rax and his team this fight. And actually, Rax ends up holding the sound barrier for the entirety of this point. His team are able to win this round after another couple fights, but Rax actually never uses the sound barrier in this entire round. Now fast forward to the second round. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because Rax actually plays Moira for the majority of this round. But I want to talk to the decision making here because you'll see as on the screen, Rax keeps pinging back and forth between Moira and Lucio and he's trying to make a decision. And essentially he's trying to decide, he's telling us in the comms at least, that he's willing to go Lucio if his tanks go D.Va Winston. But when his tank switches over to Zarya and then eventually Reinhardt, he'd rather opt for the Moira. So you see, he goes back to the Winston with the D.Va, then he goes back to spawn to change when he sees the Reinhardt, but then he ends up sticking with it. So let me just talk through quickly the dynamics between support and tank picks. So if we look at the comp that Rax's team have when he's about to come out of spawn, his tank line is a D.Va Zarya, and his healing support is Ana. Now I think Rax wanted to switch to Moira to enable his Reinhardt, but actually I don't really get why you would want to do that. Because with Ana in play, you already have someone who's a very strong healer, somebody who can heal a lot and heal in bursts. So in that sense, you've got your tanks quite well covered. There isn't much other utility for Moira other than to heal and then do some damage. Lucio on the other hand is almost all utility, in that his speed boost is one of the most powerful enabling abilities in the game. And in a lot of senses, when you play Reinhardt, there's no support you want more than Lucio. Because Reinhardt without speed boost can be quite clunky, it can be quite difficult for him to get from one position to the other, particularly when he's holding a shield. And he can get caught out quite often, particularly if he's a bit charge happy. So in a lot of ways, having Lucio for a Reinhardt D.Va or a Reinhardt Zarya is actually even better than having a Lucio in a dive comp. Just because the mobility tanks could probably survive even without the speed boost of the Lucio. But the slow fat tanks like Rein, Zarya, Roadhog, these guys actually thrive and need a speed boost. And it makes a much bigger difference for them to have it than to not have it. So in the future, don't worry so much about needing to go Moira for the bigger heals because you've already got that covered with an Ana. And actually you can see that Rax's indecision means that once again he's not able to speed boost his team throughout the door. They get there a bit late, and then he ends up making a little positioning error to try and make up for it, I guess. Goes too deep, goes way out of position from his Reinhardt, gets 3 tapped, and then he tells us in his voice as well that that was a stupid decision. So I'm going to skip now to the 3rd round, because from that point, Rax switches over to Moira, and I just want to focus on the Lucio play right now. So 1-1, tied up, Rax goes back to Lucio, and his team are ready to come out of spawn. Once again, we're going to see actually that he opts not to use his speed boost coming out of spawn. And we'll just see it in a second here, where he rather holds it, once again, not to beat a dead horse, but there's no reason not to speed boost out of spawn. And once again, we're going to see that Rax, when he does opt to use the speed boost, it's not for any great use. So he uses it here, but his team aren't actually trying to engage. They're not trying to push forward, nor is he in the comms telling his team to push forward. So if you want to use the speed boost in that way, where you feel as a shot caller or as a decision maker that you want your team to get aggressive, push up right in the face of the enemy, it's incredibly important that you actually call that information out, because your team can't even necessarily tell that they're being amped up. So again, that E ends up going largely to waste. So communication would have really been helpful. Now we're going to see that Rax goes a bit frontline Lucio. He goes in deep to try and get like 3 hits of damage, and by the time he comes back, his Hanzo's actually dead. So that was a bit of an unnecessary play there. If he just sticks with his backline, he can quite possibly heal this Hanzo. If he speed boosted out the door, he'd probably have his amp up here by this time to be able to top up the heals in a quick manner. So these are again the snowball cause and correlation effects that I was talking about. How one decision forces you into 2 other bad decisions, and Rax perhaps feeling obliged to make some sort of play, as he did with the environmental kills on the 1st round, ends up going actually out of position and not where his team needs him to be. So his Hanzo ends up dying. Then Rax heads towards point, but he gets punched. That's that fight done there. So fast forward a little bit. Just want to shout out to Rax here for a bit of good awareness. He actually notices that his Hanzo's not there, and you're going to hear him call out to his team that they should wait for their Hanzo.
Wait, you don't have Hanzo.
So this is good. This is what you should be doing as a support. Keeping track of where everybody in your team is, trying to make sure that they all stay together. And essentially as Lucio, that's your #1 job, is organizing your team. So very good stuff there. More decisive play and more call-outs like that would actually really help your play, Rax. It would really take it to the next level, because clearly you did have the awareness there and you were able to help your team out. But it's largely infrequent. You don't do it too often. So try and do it a bit more. And you can see here, actually, you do a good job of protecting your Ana from the Tracer. And I know that on the 2nd round you switched to Moira to try and quote-unquote counter the Tracer, as you said in voice. But Lucio is more than good enough to do that, as long as you stick with your Ana. So again, a little bit of peel goes a long way. You can see here the Hanzo now back with his team, gets the kill on the Tracer. Now, again, we have a problem with the amp it up. So Rax presses E to amp it up, but he's still stuck on healing. At this point, your team has just got a kill, and you know you're 5v6. You have to speed boost here. You have to turn the speed boost on, amp it up, and drive your team forward. Let them go into comms. Go, go, go. We got a kill. Let's go in. Instead, Rax actually uses speed healing amp for that entire duration, and his team are exactly where they started. So they gain nothing despite getting this pick. They're disorganized. Now Rax tells them to go on point. But the High Noon is disruptive. There's the Doom nanoed in the back, and his team are going to start losing players one by one. So again, Overwatch is a game that switches really quickly, and you need to make your decisions in a very narrow period of time. So that window of opportunity when you get a kill is very short, and you have to capitalize on it instantly. As a Lucio, it should almost be a conditioned reaction. If you see an opening pick from your team, that's the signal to turn on speed boost, amp it up if you got it, and tell your team to push forward. Instead, they end up waiting for too long, and they end up getting picked off one by one, and they end up losing the fight quite comfortably. So fast forward a little bit, Rax comes back out of spawn. His team have already got this opening kill on the D.Va, again nice, so he starts to speed boost his team through. This is good. This is what you should be doing, ushering your team forward. He spots the chance for an environmental kill on the Ana, he goes for it. Now up to this point, this is all good. But we're going to see here, like on the first point, after getting this environmental kill, Rax sort of loses track of where he should be. He gets hit with an anti-nade by the enemy Ana before she drops off the face of the earth. So at this point, if you're anti-naded, as most characters, but particularly as a character with only a 200 HP pool, you have to change your play, you have to adapt, you have to be much, much more passive. So at this point, Rax needs to back up, head towards the safe area, head towards the healer. Instead, he ends up peeking this side, looking for potential flankers, and he ends up getting deleted very, very quickly by this Tracer. And we'll see it from the Tracer's angle in a second, that it's actually not even too difficult. He just comes around the side, sees Rax, and just a couple clips is enough to take him out. So once again, if you see that play, he goes for the boop, gets hit with this anti-nade. Now at this point you need to back up out of LOS, you need to head towards your Ana, head and stay behind your Reinhardt shield. You need to make sure if you're vulnerable that you're not peeking and you're not making yourself an easy target. Instead, Rax leaves his Reinhardt for this Tracer attack and ends up getting picked off quite easily. So now fast forward, we're at 87%. This is one fight territory. Rax waits to taxi his Reinhardt, which is fine. But now you can see here that the play that's going to happen here, I'm going to let it play out, it's way too indecisive. And Rax's team aren't even able to touch the point. So you can see here they're waiting for something to happen. Rax ends up eventually trying to wall right towards the point, but he gets uppercutted, and by the time he actually touches point, it's game over, and he even gets killed by the D.Va self-destruct. So if we take it back, let's talk about decision making again. When you're in a one fight territory and you need somebody to contest, this is when your decision making is really tested. Because first of all, you need to weigh up, can we touch the point together as a group? In this case, I'd probably argue yes, there probably is enough time, there's 13 seconds, which is long enough if we amp it up to get to point as a team. If you didn't feel that confident that you would be all able to make it, then as Lucio, it's your responsibility actually to be the one who touches, because Lucio is obviously a character that's very good at going in quickly, contesting point, then getting out, and importantly, staying alive with the contest. So in this case, okay, Rax decides that I'll go with my team to touch the point. But the first mistakes he makes is that while he's waiting for his Reinhardt, that's all good. Now he amps it up. And the Reinhardt already has charged his way past the amp up, because that's what Reinhardts do. The charge ability is obviously going to do that. So that once again, the amp it up usage is quite poor, and it goes largely to waste. Now when Rax's team actually come into the choke, they don't have the amp it up to speed them all through this side, or speed them around this side. And you'll note that they've even got the opening kill. So this fight really should be in their favor. So the first way to enable your team has been wasted, i.e. the amp it up. But now we also see that Rax has a sound barrier in his pocket. And if not now, then when would you choose to use it? Your team is under severe pressure. They're being spammed at this choke point. They need to get them through safely to actually touch and have a fight. Instead, Rax opts not to use the sound barrier. Two of his teammates die to the Doomfist and the McCree High Noon, both of which would have been prevented with a sound barrier. And now this uppercut actually prevents him from even getting to the window. So again, I'll sing the same song, cause and correlation. Because Rax wastes his amp it up, he actually loses the chance for his team to be able to contest the point together. If he amps his team up at the choke, he can save his sound barrier, and they can all make their way to point together. He doesn't, then at that point, he has the option to sound barrier his team, and make sure that they at least have all the HP they need to touch point. Again, he opts not to. And in the end, he actually ends up going this entire game without using a single sound barrier. So when you look back and look at the overall picture of the game, what was actually generally very good Lucio play, generally all around solid sound Lucio play, ends up looking very bad in the context of a few mistakes. Namely, frequent wasting of the amp it up, and secondly of the indecision of when to use sound barrier. So just to summarize guys, if we focus on the amp it up, feel free first of all to use it out of spawn doors on control for the reasons that I explained. Secondly, make sure that you use it to maneuver your team around and not yourself, because there were a few occasions where Rax was using the sound amp it up just to maneuver himself around a little bit quicker. And obviously, make sure that you're calling out when you do it, because if you're amping it up, particularly with the speed, and your team doesn't know, or your team doesn't know why you're doing it, it's going to go entirely to waste. When it comes to decision making, make sure that you are in fact decisive, because as Lucio, you're in the best position to be a shot caller. So calling out a target, coordinating a plan, and then letting your team know to follow through with it is a big value play that you can make as a Lucio. And of course, this won't show up in the kill feed, this won't show up in the stats, but it will make a difference in your win percentage. And when you're deciding the calls to make, remember that you should be assessing the situation all the time. As Rax displayed there, he had the awareness quite often to know when his team were dead, to know when they needed to regroup, to know when they needed to wait for a player, to know when he needed to taxi a player. So the next step is just pushing that into a mid-fight scenario. As we saw in that first round when the Hammond was able to pick him off early, you have to assess if your death, and this applies to any character, would be a significant blow or not. In this scenario, if I die, will my team lose this fight? For Rax, the answer was yes, and therefore he should have committed the sandbar, he should have used whatever resources it took to win that fight, particularly because they were in one fight territory. And finally, a sort of rule of thumb when it comes to things like sound barrier is that obviously if you have a direct counter like a Genji Blade or Graviton Surge to save your ult for, then by all means save it. But if there's no obvious ult to respond with your sound barrier, then it's best to be aggressive and best to use it proactively, rather than to hold it indefinitely for some play that never comes. So that's all I got for today guys. Hope you found this video helpful, and I just want to give a big shout out to Rax for not only being a top patron of mine, but also for having the courage to submit the VOD for me to review, because it takes a lot of guts to put your gameplay out there to be roasted and criticized for everybody in the Overwatch community to see. Not that everybody in the Overwatch community even remotely watches my channel, but you get the point. Overall, I apologize if it was a little bit harsh, but when you get to the diamond and above tiers, there's really no need to be soft, there's really no need to handhold, because at that point you were looking at some really high-end plays and some really high-level players, so minor mistakes make a big difference. And hopefully that's what Rax would take away from this video, that it was mainly small mistakes that then snowballed into other mistakes. And if you just look at two things, which is one, being more decisive, and two, working on your amp it up usage, I think those would go a long way to really making a visible difference in how you feel when you play Lucio and what the impact is that you feel you make. Thanks to everybody for watching, and I sourced this VOD from my Discord, where I temporarily have been allowing VOD submissions while we look for some pug coaches for the pugs that I organize on my scrims. So if any of those keywords sound interesting to you, do come on down, and otherwise I'll be back before you know it with another video. See you guys soon.